Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk about the 1952 Western film High Noon and why the message of this film is not at all what you probably think it is. Okay, the plot of High Noon is pretty straightforward. It's set in the Old West and the marshal of this town, Will Kane, played by Gary Cooper, has just gotten married to a young woman played by Grace Kelly. And today Kane is retiring from his job as marshal and moving with his new wife to another town. But right before they leave, he receives a telegram that a vicious convicted killer named Frank Miller, whom Marshal Kane had arrested and put away previously, was released. And he's coming straight back to this town on the noon train with his friends with the intention of settling the score with Kane. So the townspeople encourage Kane to just leave town and not worry about it, since that's what he was going to do anyway before he got this news. So that's what he does. So while Kane is riding off into the sunset with his new bride, he starts thinking and then changes his mind about leaving and returns to the town as marshal for the rest of the day in order to face this killer and his gang who is coming to meet him. High Noon is a very unusual Western and has a very different look and feel compared to what most people think of as a typical Western. The reason for that is that neither screenwriter Carl Foreman nor director Fritz Zinnemann was known for creating Westerns, but they were both artists who were attracted to certain ideas, and the Western setting of High Noon is merely a vehicle for those ideas. They had no interest in conforming to the norms of the Western genre, and that is one of the main reasons we are still talking about High Noon today. High Noon was actually a pretty low-budget film, and one that benefited from the lack of studio supervision that often comes with being seen as a minor project by the studio. There are many elements in High Noon which defy Western convention, but the most striking is the character of the protagonist, Will Kane. Gary Cooper is unforgettable in this role, and while he oozes integrity and a sense of duty, as the film progresses, you can see the fear, the hesitation, the uncertainty in his eyes, and you rarely see things like this in the hero of a conventional Western. Will Kane actually admits that he's afraid to face his enemies and even considers running away at one point. He's also kind of an older guy, at least for this sort of role, and his face shows the lines of age, experience, and physical pain that he's suffered in his life, which further adds to the realism of his character. It turns out that Gary Cooper was actually suffering with physical ailments during production, so some of this was authentic. Another unusual feature of High Noon as a Western is how little action there is. Most of the narrative is characterized by the sense of waiting for the dreaded noon train to arrive, and imagining the doom which becomes more and more inevitable as the clock ticks and Kane slowly walks through this town realizing that he's not as popular as he thought he was, and he will likely face this band of killers alone. One of the most interesting elements of High Noon is how the film hints at backstories of the characters, but leaves them unresolved. Kane is portrayed as a very human character with many implied human flaws. He obviously has complicated relationships with some of the other people in the town, and he actually has quite a few enemies, which becomes clear when he needs this town's help the most. Okay, I want to talk about some of the political context of High Noon. Far too much is made of High Noon's backstory, specifically the notion that High Noon is an allegory about blacklisting during the infamous House Un-American Activities Committee investigations, and that the film is all about moral courage in the face of a cowardly and corrupt society. This is just not the case. The House Un-American Activities witch hunts and subsequent Hollywood blacklistings are a fascinating topic on their own, and it is true that this film was in production during the height of this episode in American history, and that High Noon screenwriter Carl Foreman was being investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee because of his past membership in the Communist Party, and it was even true that Foreman said that these events caused him to think about the screenplay for High Noon in a new way. But as attractive as this allegory idea is, it's just not what High Noon is about. For one thing, the citizens of Hadleyville don't betray Cain in the way that some people betrayed their friends during the anti-communist witch hunts. They simply don't want to risk their lives for something that they don't really have a stake in. They don't want to handle violent criminals themselves. That's what they pay Cain to do, and that's why he gets to walk around town like he owns the place, because he assumes the responsibility, not them. This film may have been substantially created by artists who were leftist and or communist, but the core message of this film is actually that it is unreasonable to expect people to act outside of their self-interest. And that is precisely the reason that societies founded on leftist ideology consistently fail to thrive. In other words, we're not all in this together. And the sooner we all accept that, the better off we'll all be. As for the notion that this film is about moral courage, and before I get to that, I want to bring up an interesting real-life example of moral courage. The actor Howland Chamberlain, who played the Weasley hotel clerk in this film, was summoned by the House Un-American Activities Committee to identify members of the Communist Party, and he basically gave them the finger. He pled the fifth and refused to testify, and as a result, he didn't work in Hollywood for another 2.5 decades. Okay, so returning to this notion of moral courage in High Noon, though everyone in the town, including Cain's wife, seems baffled by Cain's decision to return to the town to face his enemies when he could easily just skip out of town and start his new life. There's no mystery here. Cain says explicitly why he has to go back to the town, because he really has no choice. Though Cain expresses his reluctance to run, meaning that he doesn't want to see himself as a coward, he hastens to add that Frank Miller and his gang would probably just come after him in the new place to exact revenge when they were alone out on the prairie, and that Cain didn't even have any guns with him. So it would be safer for Cain to face Miller back in the town where the guns are, and also he could presumably deputize some of his friends to back him up in the gunfight. As Cain tells his wife, "I'm not trying to be a hero. If there's trouble, it's better to have it here." So right away, the courage theme in High Noon goes out the window. This film has little to do with morals or courage on Cain's part, and everything to do with the rational and pragmatic decision to stack the odds in your favor when you're facing a situation you can't get out of. This is not to say that Cain is a coward or lacks integrity. He definitely doesn't. But Will Cain is not a lone hero leading the charge against his enemies in the name of abstract notions like truth or justice. Will Cain is more like a cornered animal who is forced to make a desperate last stand because there's no way out. His actions are perfectly in line with his self-interest, just like everybody else in the film. The message of High Noon is very clear. In life, you have to be prepared to face your problems alone, because when push comes to shove, nobody else cares. Okay, that's it for High Noon. You have to check it out if you haven't seen it or if it's been a while, and tell me if you agree that the real message of this film is not what we've been conditioned to think. Thank you for watching. I'm Rod Richards. Until next time.